Let's talk about how the war on terrorism has gone. You wrote in the Claremont Review several years ago, all of this, that is the Bush administration's strategy in the war, amounted to going through the motions of war while avoiding war's essential purpose, the frightful demise of enemies whose deaths would end the war. Why, I have an adjectival question, why the frightful demise?
The death of enemies only gets rid of some enemies, whereas the fear that inspires gets rid of the rest, the ones that matter. The ones that matter are the ones that remain alive. And so it matters that the deaths be frightful.
Now, so your principal criticism of the way the war unfolded was that not being clear about what victory would mean. We never had a strategy, a means that was properly adopted to that end because we never had the end clearly in mind from the beginning. What is it about the end that we didn't comprehend in this war? What
the
fact
end
that we should have
the purpose of it all is peace. Our peace, the peace of the American people, which the administration, the ruling class, really showed that it was not interested in when it instituted the Homeland Security as a permanent thing. It showed that it was not interested in ending this whole thing. It was interested in a process, in running a process, running this war forever. I'm not sure that they were entirely conscious of the choice they were making, but this is indeed the choice they made. Now, which leads us to what our means should be, namely to convince those regimes and others like them that their safety, their very lives, depend on policing their places in ways that bring us no harm. Now, that we can do. That's doable. And that involves the frightful demise of some of them. So that, pour encourager les autres, as Napoleon used to say, to encourage the others to do the right thing.
Now, so which regimes are our enemy?
Well, Saddam Hussein's regime certainly was, but we decided to, George Bush, decided to not just overthrow Saddam, but to do so for reasons which had really nothing to do with our direct interests. One, of course, was Iraqi. The title of the operation was Iraqi Freedom. That is not self-evidently related to our own peace. He made it an ideological point that it was related, but it's only an ideological point. It's not.
You mean the second inaugural?
The second inaugural, and the second inaugural merely reflected any number of statements that had permeated the bureaucracy, that their freedom is our safety. Well, that's not necessarily true. And secondly, this notion of weapons of mass destruction, which I always thought was something of a crock.
Why is that?
Because there was very little evidence of such things after there was an incident in which his son-in-law defected. After that, there had been quite a bit of destruction, and these things, some of these things were transferred to Syria, and so.
But wasn't that a legitimate worry? I mean, after 9/11.
Yeah, but look, Saddam's. But it was a misunderstanding of what Saddam was doing to us, which was political. He was raising up a whole sector of mankind against us. It had nothing to do with, that was his weapon of mass destruction. The notion that, of course, Iraq,
his anti-Americanism.
Very successful anti-Americanism. That was the weapon of mass destruction. The Iraqi army, being a Soviet-trained army, a Soviet-equipped army, always had 1/3 of its artillery shells and chemicals. They all Soviet-supplied outfits do.
Keeps the chemical plants working.
They do, and this is what they do. So there's nothing remarkable about that, and Saddam at a certain point got rid of these things. Besides, that was not the reason to go after him. George Bush simply looked for the most politically plausible explanation at the time, for the least divisive explanation at the time. It was the truth. Truth really is ultimately quite convenient.
Well, the argument, I mean, after the WMD thing collapsed, the argument was, as you say, what was summarized finally in the second inaugural, that
That's right.
we had to drain the swamps.
To drain the swamps.
These societies would continue to generate terrorists unless we democratize them, and terrorists who could vote and who could write letters to the newspaper would not
be
blow
terrorists.
themselves up in the United States.
That was total nonsense from beginning to end. And most of all, nonsense that is divorced from any operational reality. Mm-hmm. If you do A or B or C successfully, will you then achieve your end, i.e. peace? But we did A, B, and C successfully. That is to say, we controlled Iraq. We had people driving around Iraq, naming ministers, naming mayors, naming sub-officials in the Treasury and oil ministry and everything like that. That didn't do any good. We also tried to make Iraq into a unitary state instead of working with the reality of the place, which has now manifested itself, which of course is three distinct communities. We now have, in fact, three Iraqs, just as we always knew that there would be three Iraqs, except that George Bush didn't know it. Look, let me give you a historic contretemps. In 1817, a bunch of Britishers had organized some runaway Negro slaves in Florida, in what is now Florida, which was Spanish territory, together with some Indians, to raid into Georgia. General Andrew Jackson took troops in there, killed as many of those as he could, took the Brits and hanged them, and told the Spanish governor that that would be his fate unless he controlled Spain protested vigorously, and the Monroe cabinet was a bit shaken. John Quincy Adams wrote a long and persuasive memorandum, which is still with us, that explained that it is common law that if a neighbor cannot take care of his property and thereby causes damage to a neighbor, he may very well be held to account. And that's what we were doing. Now, this is a very, very simple example to follow. We did not follow it, alas.
But back to whom to punish. When you started writing the series, you focused on Iraq, Syria, and the PLO as the three chief sources of terrorism. Right. You played Saudi Arabia's role up more, I think, in subsequent essays. You never really focused on Iran very much, and many people, including our friend Michael Ledeen, have taken exception to your charitable omission of Iran from that list of our deadliest enemies in the Middle East. Why?
Well, all right, fair question. Iran's main concern is not with us, not even with Israel. They speak loudly, they gnash their teeth at both of ourselves and Israel, but their real concern is with their real enemies, the ones they really, really set their teeth and spread their nostrils about, are the Sunnis, the Sunni Arabs, who are different religiously and racially. Insofar as they fight us, they do so as a means of getting at their real enemies. Now, this does not mean, absolutely does not mean, that we ought to overlook harm that Iran does to us.
Why do they want a nuke?
Oh, Iran wants nuclear weapons primarily as a political weapon against the Sunnis in Bahrain, Qatar, and of course Saudi Arabia.
What about Israel?
They're not stupid. Israel has some 200 nuclear weapons, and Iran knows that were they to strike Israel, the world will fall in upon them. So they're not stupid. I don't think, this is my personal opinion, I don't think that they would strike Israel. Now, I fully understand why Israel would not take that chance. Mm-hmm. And if I were an Israeli, I would strike Iran tomorrow. But if you ask my personal opinion, it is that they're not about to do that.